Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hello, everybody. I wanted to introduce today's guest with our conversation, Dee Schnautz. Dee has got a real passion for speaking to women, offering messages of encouragement and hope, and really focuses in on how she can spur other people on to commit deeds of love and how she can help individuals and women especially really just move forward with their spiritual walk as well as the walk that they have to just be the best person that they can be. She's committed to being authentic with her relationships with her family and friends. And Dee loves, like I said, just encouraging people, especially sharing God's truth through music. Professionally, Dee has been teaching in public schools for about 16 years and has just retired from her 17th year as a school district administrator. She serves as an adjunct at Greenville University, and she earned her doctorate in educational leadership from Indiana State. Her greatest joy is the 36 years that she has spent serving alongside her husband in leadership in ministry in the rural church that they attend and raising their two children, who she says somehow survived the teenage years and landed into adulthood. No doubt there were lots of cute baby pictures around to remind Dee and everybody about that these kids are special and to give them a chance and suffer through those teenage years. I know certainly that was how my wife and I made it through with our boys. Dee is always honored to be in the company of women who are, really moving forward in their walk with God. And one of the things that we will put out on the website is a couple of ways that you can connect with Dee if you'd like through LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm super excited for this interview, and I think you guys are going to get an awful lot out of this conversation. Dee is the first female guest that we've had, and I'm really looking forward to hearing how, from an adult woman's perspective, how valuable grandfathers can be in the lives of granddaughters, and especially. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into that conversation. Hi, Dee. Thanks again for having this conversation with me. And as we get going here, what I'd like to do is have you introduce your grandfathers to us and give us their names, their backgrounds, some important key dates and activities in their lives, and help us get to know them a little bit more so that we have that frame of reference as you start talking about them and the impact they had on your life.
Sure. I'm so happy to be on the podcast with you, Greg. I really appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate what you're doing for grandfathers everywhere. And I'd love to tell you a little bit about my grandfathers. So one of my grandfathers is named Ralph Martini, and he grew up in the Depression, served in World War II, and he, I think, was a middle child. He had a couple of siblings, or a sibling that passed away from, I think, like just the flu when he was a young boy, and I think that had a big impact on him growing up. He sold insurance, he did those kinds of things, and then he farmed all the time. He had a cattle and hog operation, and Grandma sold eggs. So just a guy, and had my mother, and she was the only child, and so he was just a hard worker, a godly man, served at the church. He was on the, I think, a deacon or an elder at the local country church. Just a hard worker, kind of a quiet, steady man, but he loved to tell silly jokes and he loved to tell stories. Other grandfather, my dad's dad, Lloyd Freeman Piercy, he was also born and raised during the Great Depression. He was the oldest, I believe, in his family, and the only boy. He had 3 younger sisters, and he was just he was also another guy who was kind of just quiet and steady, but he would also get so excited and say things like, "Oh, great day" in the morning, or "great day," just he got excited about something. And he served in World War II, and he would talk a little bit about his experiences there, not a lot, and he would talk about his allergies being so bad that his commander sent him to the ocean to to work the docks. And he said it was the first time that he remembered not really being affected by his allergies. And so it's just kind of fun to hear some of his stories. Of course, he only told the lighthearted ones. And my grandfather, Martini, kind of flipping back and forth a little bit, he was in pretty heavy fighting in World War II, and so really did not talk about it a lot, but we knew that it had not been, we were so proud of his service, but we knew he had a very challenging time there. And then back to Grandpa Lloyd, he lost his father, just I would say as a young adult. And so I think that probably had some impact on him as well. But he worked for the railroad. So he worked on the railroad, and then he had some farm ground, and he would farm it as well. But he raised livestock early on, but he had gotten rid of it by the time I came along. So both of my grandfathers were just great men. They loved the Lord, and Grandpa Piercy also served at his church as an elder, and they were just faithful men. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an example of kind of who they are and where they came from.
No, it does, and it's amazing too that through all those challenges of being born probably late 1920s, going through that Depression era, serving in World War II, having the experiences that young men have, that they still came back and were able to be active with their faith and hadn't lost that with everything that they had seen.
Absolutely.
So that's absolutely amazing.
It really was, and they always gave God the glory for that. And I remember when I was very young, the Vietnam War era was happening during that time, and I was young enough that I didn't understand it all. Mm-hmm. But I remember my grandfather Martini saying, when I came back to the war, people cheered for us.
Right.
And so we felt like we had done a great service. And he said, when people came back from Vietnam, that didn't happen. And he said, and that's the difference. And I thought, wow, I'm able to hear it from his perspective. And I would never have thought of that. So those were some of the kind of discussions that we would have. Again, not deep discussions around the war, because I know it was painful, but it gave me a perspective to help me understand current events.
Well, and I think too is that even, as a grandfather, and now my grandsons too, so conversations are very limited at this point. But even as a parent, I think sometimes we don't always account for, I won't say superficial, but the small conversations and the few things that we can say in a person's life at a certain time that really have a deep impact. And
absolutely
that discussion of, hey, this was different when I came home, different war, different circumstances, all of those things, but then having it resonate to make you think a little bit more of the circumstances that were going on. It's just another example of that impact, that the things we say, the things we do don't always have to be, super high up on the mountaintop, deep conversations to have an impact.
Absolutely. I'm just so grateful for that time. Now, I live close to them. So one grandfather lived literally a mile across the field from me.
Okay.
And the other grandfather lived through the bottoms, probably, and what I mean by the bottoms, the old creek bed that would flood when it rained too much and you couldn't drive through. Probably another 7 miles from me. So they were nearby, so I was able to see them frequently. But yeah, it was just the little conversations, the day-to-day, just the living. Those comments were powerful. And it surprises, I hadn't really thought about that until we started talking about grandparents, but it's it's remarkable just how important the little conversations can be.
Right. And I even find myself at this point, I never thought about it when I was much younger, but even going through some of the scriptures and some of the writings, sometimes it's the smaller stories or the smaller sentences that can sometimes hit you just at the right time in the right place. It doesn't have to be a long chapter or a super long verse that just needs to come in and touch you and resonate with you. So help me understand a little bit about the interactions that you had with your grandfathers as you were a little girl. I think we had talked a little bit about how it sounded like they threw you right into the farm work.
They did. They did. I'm the oldest of 4 girls. So my poor dad, he farmed, he worked the railroad, he raced motorcycles, and here we are, 4 girls, no boys to help him with that. And so that's what I got to do. I got to help. And so as a little girl, Grandpa Martini would take us out to see the baby calves, to see the hogs. And he would sometimes take a calf that was struggling, or even some of his litters of hogs, to his basement under the heat lamps, just to kind of make sure he could check on them and make sure that they were okay, because it's a huge investment. He didn't want to lose that.
Sure.
And just showing that great care for those kinds of things. But early on, he would let us bottle feed some of the things that the animals that needed bottle fed. And he was very supportive of my pony that I got when I was 5. And so he would, help me with that. And he would, I rain and water out to them. And so, just showing me how to be strong and how to take care of those things. So, and then my grandpa Lloyd, he was the same. When I got a little bit bigger, I would say, I'm not sure how old I was when I first started driving the tractor, but my grandfathers would be in the field helping farm. And so they, every pass I'd get away, depending on what field I was in. So I knew they were supervising me, but I also had some autonomy to do it my way, within the parameters that I had, but every pace, And I still recall one time when I was learning how to plow, and it was a small tractor at that time, a small plow behind me. We don't even plow today. We farm totally different than that. But I remember my dad saying, follow along closely, do what he does. And I did. But when he stopped, I didn't stop. Oh. And I hit the back of his implement and tore out the front tractor. And not bad, but I just knew I was going to get scolded. I just knew I was in big trouble. Right. And I wasn't. It was, well, honey, you're learning. This can be fixed. You're fine. No one got hurt. The tractor still runs. We'll just fix this later. Let's just keep moving. We got a lot of work to do. And so I do it. And when it was time to haul hay, I get to drive the tractor. But as I got bigger and stronger, I learned how to pitch bales of hay and straw and how to put it in the barn and play in the barn. And so they were just very good gardening, fishing. They would take me fishing. Before every Father's Day, both grandfathers would get together and set up a day to take me fishing. And we would fish. They would show me how to bait the hook. And but honestly, they did a lot of that for me. But we would just fish, and we would get a mess of fish so that we could fry them for Father's Day. And it was so much fun getting to be with them. And we didn't have folding chairs. We had the buckets that they'd turn upside down, and we'd sit on those and fish. And both grandmas would pack a little bit of food, and we get to sit and eat. And mostly we talked and scared away the fish, but they were beautiful times for me. And then also growing up, helping in the garden, helping pick blackberries. I still remember when I was a little girl, I did not like breaking beans. I did not like, breaking the green beans. But I remember sitting with both of them and doing that. And my Grandpa Martini one day, I'm thinking, ooh, it's starting to sprinkle. I'm going to get out of this. I'm not going to have to do this outside today. No, we sat under the tree. There was no threat of lightning, and the rain was drizzling down, and it kind of cooled things off, and we broke the beans. And now that's a precious memory for me. And so I'm so glad that we continue to do that. So they just kind of took me under their wing, and they taught me, and they were patient with me, and they were proud of me. And if I made a mistake, they recognized the mistake. And we talk about how to fix it or how to move on. But it was never that I was ever in their way or under their feet. They took time for me, and I never felt like I was a bother to them. And they were busy men and hard workers, but I was more important to them, I think, than what they were doing. So I was very grateful for that.
How do you think, looking backwards at that now, how do you think that probably made you feel and sunk in as far as just your worth as, you know, a granddaughter and a daughter to that family? Middle school wasn't too hard for me necessarily. I think that 8th grade year I went to a rural school, and the 8th grade year girlfriends that you used to have would kind of then break apart if you weren't going to the particular high school that they were going to. And there was a small number of us going to this small rural high school. And so we're like, well, okay, we're going to high school. Let's figure this out and go. But I think having their love and support, that when I got to high school and things were challenging in some occasions with a few things with other girls, some of that mean girl stuff that happens in high school, I always knew that I was loved. I knew that I was cherished. I knew that I was worthy. And I didn't have to find love in a wrong place or a bad place. I didn't have to search for that because I had it already. Right.
And I was a child of God, but the men in my life loved me appropriately, and they cherished me appropriately. And so when things would get bad, I could at least step back and say, these love me and cherish me. I'm okay.
Yeah.
And I think that having that confidence that my grandfathers had in me helped me to be a strong and capable woman. I think it wasn't until I got older sometimes and realized that maybe I couldn't do everything that doubt might have crept in. But then I think it was just this, they were patient, they were kind, they gave me confidence. And the work with them was challenging work. And I could outwork some of the other boys that were my age. And that felt good.
Oh, yeah.
And then as I continued to work, the work that I did with them, the other work seemed easy. And honestly, a little bit boring. But I thought, man, if I can do that kind of labor, that's why I like to lift weights today, because I loved pitching. I loved the soybean bags, picking that stuff up and helping fill the planter. That's why I still love that today. It was great work. So, yeah, I just think it helped me have confidence and just helped me to be strong in so many ways.
And I'm glad you said that, because I think especially with grandfathers, and I've talked with a few that definitely have younger granddaughters, is one of the themes that we're definitely seeing, I think, as we've been growing up, is that having the grandfathers and fathers especially, I'm not trying to diminish dad's roles, but grandfathers just add that extra layer of self-worth, and hey, you're loved, you've got worth, you have these different senses, and in the strong family where young women don't have to start chasing that affection elsewhere.
And I think yes, so right, Greg. And I think the other thing for that is that having that confidence but not being coddled by them gave me some freedom. And I didn't want to disappoint them. I did not want to disappoint them. And so some of the decisions that I made, I had to ask myself, would this hurt my grandparents? I knew it would hurt my parents, but what would my grandparents do? Well, it would kill them, is what I would think. I can't do that to them. So it actually, that strong relationship with them, really, in knowing where they stood on things and what their expectations were, kept me from making some really stupid decisions. Not that I didn't make some, because I did, but I just am very grateful for that.
Sure. Well, and it's interesting because I've talking with other people about their experiences with their grandfathers, that becomes a little bit of a theme, that when children have a strong relationship with their grandparents, there is much more of a, I don't want to let my grandfather down, or I don't want to let my grandparents down.
Mm-hmm.
I think with
Absolutely
the child-parent relationship, there's the rebellion side of it, which is natural as far as I'm trying to seek my own identity. But on the grandparent side, it's much more of, I don't know how, I almost want to go back to a classic master-pupil type relationship to an extent.
Yeah.
That's because,
sure.
With your education background, it's popping into my head, but
absolutely,
that idea of like, hey, this is the person that's really been my strong mentor. Now grandpas are also fun with ice cream and toys and different things like that.
Yes,
but
absolutely,
and so I think that's an aspect of that grandpa-grandchild relationship that sometimes gets lost and not talked about so much anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's so powerful, more powerful than we think. And a negative relationship with the men in our lives can also be really, really tough.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I've not had that experience, but I've talked to people. I've talked to women who are like, well, I'm not sure I want to have a relationship with God if he's going to be my father. I've not had a good relationship with my father or my grandfathers. They let me down. They disappointed me, or things were very inappropriate, and so for me spiritually, I'm so thankful that when I think of God the Father, I think of the relationship with my father. I think of the relationship with my grandfathers, and they were consistent. And they weren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they were consistent in their walk. And I'm so grateful for that, because it had such a huge impact on me, and it has allowed me to have a trusting relationship with God the Father.
Well, that's huge, and I think that's something that certainly from my perspective hadn't really thought about in the same way. I think definitely that may be the difference between young boys to fathers and grandfathers, and maybe young women to fathers and grandfathers, and so that is powerful, and it's just another, lack of a better word, testimony to the strength and the positivity of what grandfathers bring to the table when they really execute that role with responsibility, and it is a fun role, but it is one of those things where it's, hey, we're setting the tone, we're setting an example, and we're trying to bring up these grandkids the best possible way we can.
And it's that spiritual legacy that they leave behind that is so powerful. And it lasts much longer than they were here.
Sure.
And it's such a beautiful thing. And my husband's father, the grandfather for my kids, he passed away several years ago, but his spiritual legacy continues. And it's exciting to see. And so it is profound, and it's so important.
How did that relationship evolve as you were getting into your high school years? You definitely had mentioned that it helped steer you away from, bad relationships, perhaps.
Sure.
But how did that evolve? Because now, you're not the young girl that's bumping into the back of the tractor on the farm. Now you're a young woman who's starting to, see the world and challenge some, beliefs and some ideas, and the world is really opening up in terms of, what you're reading and thoughts and theories, and help you through the high school years.
I think because my grandfathers built such a relationship of trust early on, and they treated my grandmothers so well. Like my grandpa Martini, when grandma would finish cooking, he would do the dishes because he said she'd worked really hard on that meal, and he felt like that's something he could do for her. And so just seeing that respect that they had for my grandmothers So when it came into high school, I was still farming with them. I was still working with them. I was still seeing them frequently. And so that relationship just matured, but I still knew that I could go to them with questions about things, and they would give me honest answers. And I think, again, just knowing that I was cared, that they believed in me, that I was strong because of the things that they had allowed me to do and learn. I think that relationship changed some, but it was still very similar, which I know may sound odd. I had a friend when we were in high school who was complaining about her grandparents. And she was like, oh, I'm just sick of, grandma, blah, blah, blah. I'm just sick of grandpa, blah, And I was like, she was, don't you feel that way too? And I said, well, no, I really don't. She's like, well, I'm just so tired of them getting into my business. And I just said, well, I am so sorry. I don't feel that way. I enjoy every minute I get to have with them. But I was thankful that I could say that, because I'd been taught that it's okay to have a different opinion, that you can say that in love. And so I was able to say, no, I just could not disrespect my grandparents that way and say to someone else, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Because I didn't feel that way. As I got older, my relationship with them, how many people would you tell where the key to your house is, and then tell your daughter's friends, hey, if we're not home, here's where the key is. Come on downstairs and grab you a soda. There's cookies in the cookie jar upstairs, and there's chips in the cabinet. Just help yourself if you are coming through and you need something. I mean, to me, that's such a huge thing.
Yeah.
for them to have done that. I mean, this was my grandpa Martini. I mean, here's the key, honey, and just come in. So my friends would leave a note. I wouldn't even know they'd come through. And yeah, we went down to your grandma's. They weren't home, but we went in and got a soda and stuff. But we left them a note, and so I just think that continued that. So, I don't know that but it was just still there, and I still loved them, and I still wanted to make them proud.
Yeah, well, and I think too is because they were consistent in their relationship with you, and that's one of the blessings that you had, was that they were so close versus I'm a few hundred miles away. That may change, but those relationships are very different when you're seeing your grandparents.
Yes, they are.
Probably daily or every other day or something similar.
Yes.
It's a trusted adult who's known you in, some of your good times and bad times, that it sounds like you had that opportunity to go to talk to them, where you could certainly talk to your parents about whatever had come up, but then the grandparents give you a different perspective on things because they're not maybe as emotionally tied into it as a parent is when you're under the same roof. Does that make sense?
And I think that's very true. I think they have the perspective of being away from that a little bit, and this perspective of years of experience. Mm-hmm. And even though they may have had the emotion, they didn't have the emotion of all the kids in the house at the same time, trying to raise them, trying to pay the bills, trying to do the laundry. So there was that piece, and I so agree with what you said.
Yeah. Now,
so true.
As you got out of high school, I think I remember right when we were talking, you got married fairly young, and
yes, I did.
There were some good examples, even that your grandfather had when you came home one evening, a little frustrated at your new husband.
My husband and I got married. I was 19; he was 24, and we've been married now just so it will be 37 years in October.
Wow.
But I was at Grandma and Grandpa's, and I was frustrated about something that my husband had done or hadn't done. And now looking back on it, I'm sure it was something really ridiculous, and that he would have had every right to be much more frustrated with me. But I was at the dinner table, and I had said something negative about my husband. And my grandfather's never really disciplined me. I mean, I never got a spanking from them. I don't remember ever really getting in trouble with them. My grandpa Martini said, Deanne, we love Jono. He is a good man. He loves you. He loves God. And I am not going to sit here and hear anything at the kitchen table, ever. He goes, you work it out. You love him. He's a good man. But I am not going to support any negative talk about him in this house.
Wow.
And it felt like just this big slap in the face. But I've been so grateful for that because he was right. He was right. He didn't need to hear that. I didn't need to say that. That wasn't fair to my husband. I think so many marriages are ruined because we're immature. We're young. We're not sure how to handle those things. And so who do we go to? We go to our family. Well, then we start talking negative about that spouse. And typically what we see happen is then all of a sudden the family doesn't like the spouse anymore. And the next thing you know, there's a separation and a divorce. And then, or maybe they're back together and you still love your spouse, but then your family's still aggravated at your spouse. And I just think that was some of the best advice that I could ever have received. It hurt to hear it, but I am so thankful. I just am so grateful to my grandpa Martini for that because it needed to be said. And it took a lot of courage for him to say that. But I'm grateful for that today. It helped me, and not to say that I still didn't say negative things occasionally, but never to grandpa. And it helped me to grow up. I needed to grow up. I was immature, and it really helped. So that was sound advice, and I'm grateful for that. So yeah, it was hard to hear, but I'm glad he loved me enough. I'm glad he loved my husband enough to say it because it needed to be said.
And there's no way that he probably would have said something like that if he hadn't been purposely building that relationship with you from the time you were a little girl, because that is a difficult thing to come out and say, because the easiest thing is sit back, listen, and to your point, that just becomes in his mind, oh, here's a negative for, the son-in-law. And then he's going to start looking for negatives, and he's going to start, on that path too.
No, he wasn't having any of it. and my grandfathers built relationships with my husband. They took him under their wings and both did, but he got along so well with them, and they were so good to him. And I'm just very grateful for that. And I think they became like grandfathers to him too. And so I'm just very grateful for the influence that they've had in my life and on my husband's life, for sure.
That's fantastic. Any other, I don't know, big memories or favorite stories that you have of your grandfathers that you'd like to share as we start to wrap up?
As we wrap up, when I was very small, I want to say I was 4 or 5. My dad was little tiny. I don't know what kind of car it was. It may have been a Triumph or a Nova or I don't know. Something that I wanted to take my grandpa Piercy for a ride back to the pond because I had learned how to drive that thing. And so he got in and sat beside me. I had to stand up to drive it. And I'm headed towards the pond, and my grandpa's thinking, oh, little girl, you don't want to go in the pond. Are you going to be able to stop this thing? And I was able to back it up and bring it back. I'm not kidding you, until the day up until about the time he passed away, he was still telling that story about me driving him back to the pond and how proud he was of his little granddaughter that could drive the vehicle back there. And that was just a fun story. Just the gardening, just the hands-on stuff with them was so much fun. Hearing stories from their days of growing up. My grandpa Martini was the only one of my grandparents to go to high school. And he told the story. He lived in rural Boyd, Illinois, that his dad would drive the wagon to the end of the Boyd Road, which was 4 miles or so, 5 miles. Someone from Mount Vernon would pick him up in their horse-driven wagon, take him into town. He stayed and they paid rent for him to stay above a donut shop.
Okay.
He would be up at 4 in the morning frying donuts before he went to high school. And then he'd stay there all week. And on the weekend, someone would bring him out to the Boyd Road. His grandpa would go pick him up. He'd come home and do chores all weekend, go to church, study, and do it again. And for me, when I was going through my Ph.D. program, and that was a challenge, I would drive to Indiana State on a Tuesday night, stay in a hotel, go to early morning classes, which would have been 6:30 a.m. my time. It was 7:30 a.m. their time, be there all day, drive home. I would stop to think for a minute that I'm not sitting above, sleeping above the donut shop, having to get up at 4 a.m. to fry donuts so I can come to school. And then my other grandparents, I still remember Grandma Ada and Grandpa Lloyd, when I was in high school, or maybe older than that, I remember them sitting around the kitchen table studying for their GED.
Wow.
And so education was really important to them. The schooling that they got in the one-room school was incredible. They kept all of their school books because they had to purchase them like for everybody in their family. Mm-hmm. And so they were costly and they saved them. So just, knowing that was important to them, those were fun stories for me. And eating corn curls or corn chips, drinking orange soda, sitting on the floor and watching Bonanza. Wow. Watching those old Westerns. Those were just fun times. And so I'm just very grateful for all the time that I've had with them and all the memories. And I just hope that I can be that kind of person that is supportive, that has to speak the truth when truth needs to be spoken, that as I move into that role of grandmother someday, I hope that examples from my grandfathers and my grandmothers will help me to be a better grandmother. But I think the most important thing that they've taught me is that spiritual legacy that you leave behind is possible. And it's just so important because they were consistent in their daily walk, because they weren't afraid to talk about their love of Jesus, because they weren't afraid to get up and pray around the table at communion time. One of my grandfathers, Grandpa Martini, actually wrote a communion meditation that got published in the Christian Standard years ago. And he would give communion meditations because they weren't afraid, and because they weren't afraid to teach me. I will forever be indebted to them for the spiritual legacy that they've left behind for me and for my family. And that's the greatest thing that they could ever have left me.
Man, I am so happy that you had such a strong relationship with them and they were able to pass on so much to you. And one of the items that just popped into my head is, what would your advice be to grandfathers going through this experience that have granddaughters? And
one of the biggest pieces of advice that I would say is, if the grandfathers are married, your granddaughter is going to be watching how you treat your wife. They're going to watch how you treat her. And my grandfathers were loving men. They cared for their wives. And I'm so blessed to have found a man that does the same for me. And he does dishes a lot of the time. And I'm really thankful for that. He does so much. And I just think how men treat the women in their life is critical. Because I think then we end up choosing men who treat women in similar ways. I think that's really important. And to be consistent, let your yes be yes. If you say you're going to do it, do it. And if you say you believe one thing, but you do another thing, be careful of that, because your granddaughter will be watching and be learning. And do you want your granddaughter to say, well, I said this, but I'm really going to do this? It's okay because grandpa does that. And is that the kind of granddaughter that he wants to raise? And so those would be, just live your faith. And if you're not a Christian, just treat the women in your life well and have confidence in them. Don't baby them, but have confidence, teach them, and just love them and enjoy the time that you have with them because it matters.
Well, thank you so much. That's awesome advice, and I know I'll take that to heart as the grandchild. And grandson starts to get older, and I've got a granddaughter that's coming along here in the next month or so. So
that's so exciting! Congratulations.
Thank you, and really looking forward to having that relationship. I know it's definitely going to be a little bit different from the grandson, but that is just going to be an awesome relationship. I just know it. So
it will. It'll be beautiful. It'll be beautiful, and your relationship will look different, and that's okay. Yep. It'll be wonderful. So I'm so thrilled for you, and I appreciate what you're doing. It's just so important, and I love the work, and I really hope that that people can learn from all the stories that you're sharing. So I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.